Yeah, so this is Hiko Simon here on my Hiko Talk channel. I'm doing a video response to Reynoldsair's video response to Chemistinjapan's response to Radrey, whose response was to Basixx, whose response was to International Ace on racism and black people in Japan. First up, this is my new laptop. I got a Sony because everyone else is using Macs, and this is pretty cool. The spec on this is the Type Z. It's excellent. I'll be reviewing it at some time. On the topic itself and some of the things that were going around, for a start, racism of black people in Japan. I'm not black. I'm not going to say that there is no racism against black people in Japan, or that it's terrible, because I obviously haven't experienced it. I have friends, black friends and people from Taiwanese, Koreans, Ainichi Korean and Korean, and so on and so forth. Everybody has different experiences, and some people, and also people react to the same experiences very differently. So in terms of, I really don't want to address the question of racism in Japan, or whether Japan's racist, or that sort of stuff. I'm not really interested in that. I think a lot of that has to do very much more with the people who feel that they're experiencing it in the perspective of those people. My personal thing is, generally speaking, there's not really a lot of the vicious kind of racism, like conscious, mean racism like I'm used to seeing or experiencing in other countries. There is a lot of ignorance in Japan, simply born out of lack of experience interacting or knowing how to be sensitive towards other people, and that can, of course, lead to trouble. But yeah, that's not what I want to talk about. It's not the point that I want to pick up from Reynoldsair, which kind of got me. It was this idea as to whether, what are my pet peeves, and he was responding to my comment on Chemistinjapan's video about whether it's my pet peeve is, I hate people who, or I hate the habit many people fall into. It's a trap, I think, of beginning to talk about the Japanese. The Japanese eat with chopsticks. The Japanese are a homogenous society. The Japanese, love white people. They hate black people. They look down on Koreans. The Japanese are this and that. It's something that we want to do. You always want to break everything down to the easiest to categorize way of stereotyping things. And of course, Japan isn't the sort of, at least physiologically, it's not as racially diverse or cosmopolitan, or it doesn't appear as cosmopolitan as other societies, such as those colonies that we're all from, or that many of us who are watching these videos are from, people like myself from New Zealand, or Americans, or Canadians. That said, as much as human beings we always want to generalize things, my experience of living in Japan for 11 years, spending 7 of those years working for, pretty much not knowing any gaijins for a long time, only working around Japanese people and living with Japanese people, and now being more in a more cosmopolitan sort of a background as well. The conclusion I came to very quickly was, as much as we try to deal with and understand Japan on a day-to-day basis by making generalizations, and we need to do it to be able to sort of comprehend what's going on, the conclusion that you come to after many years is that Japanese are just people like anybody else. It's funny, there are many forces, such as those mentioned by Basixx and mentioned by Reynoldsair, as to no, Japanese are different, Japanese are special, we need to treat Japanese in a different way. And the fact is that many of these are actually raised by Japanese people themselves. There's this whole school of kind of pseudoscience in Japan called Nihonjin Ron. Nihonjin, like Nihonjin, and Ron, as in Giron. It's kind of philosophy as to what it means to be Japanese. And it's this whole thing that many Japanese people, not even many, it's probably a very small number, but they're very much into the idea of trying to explain why they're so unique. And it's funny, because many of the things which, if you ever read about Nihonjin Ron and some of the conclusions it comes to, these are things which, if they were stated by anyone else, they would pretty much be considered to be racist. They draw very broad conclusions for a Japanese. For example, it's impossible for Japanese to learn English because Japanese has a unique linguistic system of how they pronounce vowels and so on. or Japanese, for example, one made by the former Japanese Prime Minister many years ago. Japanese can't eat American beef because Japanese are unique, for that they have a longer intestinal tract than any other race on Earth, which apparently means that, for example, which is that's apparently debatable as well, but Japanese believe this, and that's why they'd be unable to digest foreign beef, which has never been eaten by Japanese people before, which is why they had to prohibit imports of foreign meat products, for example. Fortunately, of course, that was ridiculed and laughed away as it should have been. But yeah, I mean, so I think part of the reason it's easy to get away with saying things about the Japanese is that many Japanese people say these things themselves. They go, "Ware ware Nipponjin wa ohashide tabemasu. Ware ware Nipponjin wa hoka no jinshu wa nai." There's one thing you said though. One thing that Reynoldsair said, which kind of bugged me. You said that Japanese, like with Ainu and Ryukujin, which are very, very, very small minorities in Japan, of course, but the idea that they're not Japanese. That's stupid. I'm sorry, that's really stupid. I mean, that's like saying just because Americans call black people, they're not Americans, they're black people. That's ridiculous. Of course they're Americans. Of course Ainu people are Japanese people. In fact, I mean, the whole thing, there's this big debate about whether Ainujin exist, because under the laws integrating them under the Meiji period, it said that there were no other races in Japan. These people in Hokkaido are Japanese just like the rest of us, and it's always been the Ainu trying to recover their independent language and culture against all of this. That has kind of been their struggle to recover their language, which has pretty much died out. There was an Ainu politician in the Diet, Japanese, of course, but it's this whole, which is just like Welsh, just like Maori, is these cultures which have been subjugated, not really separated and discriminated, and of course with Okinawa as well. Okinawa is a separate case, because they were, of course, they didn't rejoin Japan until 1976. But stuff like that, this whole idea that, and again within Japanese society, of course, I mean, it's not purely, racial divides. There are other sort of ways that people sort of categorize themselves. There's blood types, there's all these sorts of things but besides which, I mean, just the point being that, after being here for many years, it's like saying, just like you might say Americans are generally overweight. Statistics show Americans are, on average, they have the highest, to Australia actually. Australians, I think, are the most obese country in the world. Americans are the second most obese. So you could say for religious Americans, more Americans are Christian than any other form of religion. So people say, Japanese will say Americans are Christian and fat. Regardless of the fact that might be offensive to the very many Muslims, Jews, atheists, skinny vegetarians, So the point is, do you disregard the feelings of the substantial number of people that don't conform to the stereotypes that you feel quite comfortable making, and that Japanese, granted, often feel quite comfortable making about themselves? With regards to the racism thing, Japanese are not racist, and Japanese are racist. Japanese are people, and people have the same capacity to be smart and considerate and stupid and ignorant that you get in any country. I mean, you can go to some parts of New Zealand or Australia, and you'll meet viciously racist people, you'll meet ignorant people. It doesn't change in Japan, and a lot of people I know, I've heard of terrible experiences some people have had dealing with extreme cases of ignorance, and in some cases I've heard stories of stuff which sounds like nasty racism. Actually, it happens in Japan. It doesn't happen as much in Tokyo, I don't think, probably because it's a more cosmopolitan city. I've been very lucky, partly because it's true, because I'm blonde-haired and blue-eyed, that it doesn't happen so much to me. But, I mean, that's not something that's wrong with Japan as a society and as a country, as a lot of people are always trying to argue. And often people make those sort of arguments in complete ignorance about what's going on in their own countries and how much worse, and historically worse. There's this whole idea that Japan's historically always been a bad guy. And it makes it easier to paint these sort of broad strokes across the whole society. The conclusion is that Japanese are people. In the same way that you can say things about human beings, you can say it exists in Japan, or there are these cultural trends, there's these aspects of Japanese culture and so on. But it really bugs me to hear people making blanket statements about what 120 million people think or do. I don't think Japanese are inscrutable. This is something I mentioned to Chemistinjapan. That's another Nihonjin-ronish sort of thing which Japanese made up and promoted about themselves from a long time ago that people believe. But anyway, that's just what I want to say. Japanese are just ordinary people, smart people, stupid people, ignorant people, and yeah, with all the problems that people have. Peace.